Automaton Lung. This was a 3DS game originally that I had heard about just before the 3DS eShop was shut down. And I remember thinking to myself, this game looks amazing, I absolutely need to go buy this thing. But because my brain is made of Swiss cheese, I promptly forgot and just, didn't. And after I stumbled upon this on Steam, it wasn't until I was almost finished playing it to 100% completion that I realized it was the same game. So it's really nice that this got saved in some way, shape, or form, because I think this is a fairly interesting game that is definitely worth a play. It gave me an entire night of fun, and while it's not perfect, it's a very interesting experience. Automaton Lung is a game that is an exercise in minimalist storytelling. There is all of one word in the game, and for some reason it's a stage layout. Not really sure why. But we are one character that wakes up in a room with no idea what's going on. There's a broken pod behind us. Presumably we just came out of that somehow. And you can jump back in there, and there's actually a hidden teleporter that drops you in a room with enemies that'll try and shoot you, which I did not find until my third playthrough. You have a pretty standard moveset in Automaton Lung. You can walk around, you can shoot. There's a lock-on function to allow you to shoot enemies with some degree of precision. This is very important. You have the weakest jump ever, but you do have a jetpack which can be used to augment this, both as a higher jump as well as sort of a hover effect if you hold down the jetpack button while you're jumping. Although weirdly enough, you also have a hoverboard that does the same thing, so it's kind of a lateral move in that respect. But let me tell you about the hoverboard, because it starts off with the worst first impressions ever. When you're on this hoverboard, you start off very, very slow. You have to build up momentum, and it's kind of not very fun. It gets caught up on every single bit of environment that isn't perfectly flat, at least until it starts really building up speed. And no matter what speed you're going, it handles like a dead walrus. It is slow, it is awkward, and you absolutely need this thing, so hope you get really well acquainted with your beloved hoverboard. You will move around this one room, and eventually you'll find others. Enemies will attack you, and you'll have to utilize your ability to run and shoot at them to take them out. And this tutorial takes place in a giant tower. I'll talk about this tower in a minute, because I've got issues with this tower. But eventually you will find your way outside of this tower. I found myself in this bizarre cathedral, and when I exited it, I found myself in this interesting city that was entirely desolate. And most curious of all, this city was surrounded by a giant cage. What was that about? The whole objective of this game is to collect a bunch of picture frames like the ones you've been collecting to definitely sort out that photo album problem you've been having, which you're definitely gonna get to at some point, James. But while I was in this city, I saw these photo frames sitting up in the sky, on top of the skyscrapers. Unfortunately, my jump was not very good. It's the worst jump ever. I noticed very quickly that there was this weird ramp-looking thing, and this game supplies you with a hoverboard, so get your Marty McFly on and do a sick ollie off that ramp to get into the why am I in the sky in a giant beetle now? Okay. And now you're in the world map, with no idea why you're here or how you're here, except that that ramp was actually a spaceship. From here on out, you are running around, going to various locations, trying to collect those picture frames to eventually open a door so that you can move on. And if you're really stylish, collecting 210 total picture frames to allow you to access something a little different. But I figured, maybe there's more to it than this. I did notice that every single time I collected one of those picture frames, it increased my health by what I believe is the technical scientific definition of a smidgen. Seriously, it's such a small amount you would never notice it. But I figured maybe it would increase my jump height the more I collected them as well, and maybe I just have to go back to that city on top of the tower in a bird cage to increase my jump and eventually be able to crack down my way on top of those buildings to get them like they're jumping orbs. Unfortunately, this game is not quite the sequel to Crackdown I initially thought it to be, but it is pretty fun. And the fact that you're not constantly upgrading yourself through these picture frames is actually very important in terms of the game's overall structure. This means that every single picture frame I saw before in the previous area was actually completely attainable without any sort of assistance. That means that there was some way to get it, I just didn't see it. And indeed, there's lots of things in this game that are just out of reach, and there's definitely a way to do it from level 1, no power-ups, nothing. You just gotta figure it out yourself and study the rather intricate and complex stage design. This game really values curiosity and exploration, and that's awesome. Now, in spite of the fact that this game is a experiment in minimalist storytelling, there are some things that I think you as a viewer can kind of infer, or at least, I mean, the whole objective of experimental minimalist storytelling is that you try and impart your own interpretations of stuff, even if it's through projection. And here is kind of a weird world, and my interpretation was that we were some kind of android created in this tower. For what purpose, I could never tell you. There's a giant city in a cage, which I can only think was to try and protect it from falling meteors or something. Outside, there's a giant desolate wasteland of nothingness, so some sort of apocalyptic event must have occurred. One of the locations you can visit is some kind of cathedral. This was definitely a place that had religion and was an advanced civilization in some regard. And heck, one of the enemies looks like some kind of totem of worship, so yeah, religion's definitely here, even if they worship robot bird things. Also, aliens might be involved. I'm just saying. Now, I didn't realize this until every other location was explored, but your goal is to visit all these locations, collecting these picture frames, and if you hit 120 of them, of 210, you'll be able to continue the game. Your whole goal is just get past this one fence, effectively. They even actively track all the locations here and how many picture frames are in each of them, so that's pretty cool. Unfortunately, here's where I kind of disliked how this game was set up. This game is kind of a bit like something along the lines of LSD Dream Emulator or Yume-Nikki. You wander around collecting stuff, you look at stuff, you move on, and you try and just make your own interpretations as to what's going on, and that's fine. That's fun, and being able to do that is great. But you have to understand that you need, at minimum, 120 of those picture frames in order to open that gate, which is your main goal, of course. So going back to the start, all the way at the beginning, you start at the very tippy top of a tower. This tower is a tutorial. It's the thing you handle before anything else in the game, and I think we can all agree starting a game off with a tutorial so that the player knows what they're doing, or at least putting them in environments so that they can mess around and figure out what their options are, is sensible. What's a little bit less sensible, however, is the fact that this tower has something like 22 levels, not including the city at the top and the desert at the bottom, which is a separate level, and each one of these levels has 5 picture frames. Doing the quick math here, there's something like 110 picture frames in this tutorial, of 210. Now, I'm no mathologist, so much so that I like to use the term mathologist instead of mathematician, but that's half the collectibles in the game just relegated to the tutorial. Bearing in mind that this is a game about exploring this world and seeing what's out there and interacting with it and coming to your own conclusions and building the story backwards from that, why is the majority of the collectibles that you need to complete the game in the tutorial exactly? I just don't understand that. And here's the thing, I didn't even realize this was a tutorial until I'd gone and completed all the other locations in the game up to this point, and I still couldn't access the final door. And the reason for this is because the tutorial is structured kinda weird. So you start off on the top floor of this tower, right? And that's fine. At one point in this room, eventually you'll come across an elevator and you can select all the other floors. In fact, you can go to the very bottom and get ejected out into the desert wasteland and just leave if you want. But there's some just weird structural things to this huge extended tutorial because there's not really much to teach the player after the first room anyway. Like, you know how to run, you know how to jump, you know how to shoot. That's pretty much the core principles of everything you need to know about this game, and yet it proceeds to continue for about 20 more stages. With the second stage, weirdly enough, being what I would consider a boss. Because, while it's not that much of a threat, it has more health than basically anything else in the game. So, it's kind of weird to make level 2, well, it's easy, but still kind of a boss. That's just structurally a little bit weird. What's even weirder, however, is if you remember that room we teleported to by going into our pod at the start? Yeah, that's a room you can normally go through. It's basically on the critical path, but the thing is, if you go to that room, you can actually just find a door to leave through the top of the tower, completely bypassing the tutorial entirely. I kind of did that the first time I played because I didn't know what was going on or what I was supposed to do or where I was supposed to go. I just walked out of the tutorial and I was in the city and I had to just sort of smash my head against a wall trying to figure things out. That's not a great tutorial. It's weird that the majority of your content, you know, in a game about exploration is locked away in an area that's about not exploring anything. It's weird that your tutorial can let you eject yourself before you're ready, I guess. And it's also weird that the tutorial just is so extended and has nothing to really do with anything. I feel like this is almost entirely filler content and it's the one big issue this game has. And heck, I I still feel like I wasn't completely tutorialized. I didn't really understand what the value of those picture frames were, and honestly I thought, okay, well I can't jump to the top of these buildings, maybe I need to go find new equipment or something, because maybe there's an expanding moveset in this game, or maybe getting more picture frames would let me jump higher, but neither of those are true. Well, sort of. There is a bit of an expanding moveset in the sense that there are a few optional areas that will provide you different weapons, although the vast majority of them are underwhelming to say the least. At the very start, you've got your little pea shooter, which is okay. You can get a sniper rifle, which flings you like 2 feet back and it's not really worth using. You get a rocket launcher, which does a lot of damage, but can damage you, so it's not really worth using. And you've got a machine gun that is basically your pea shooter, but faster, so it's objectively the single best weapon in this game, aside from the thing you collect if you manage to get all the collectibles in. So yeah, to summarize, this game is amazing, but it forces you into the one thing that ignores all this game's strengths, and you have to do it at least to some degree if you want to actually complete it. And it's not like the tutorial stages are all that interesting. Like, they're all pretty much just basic platforming challenges. Like, I've gone through every stage and collected everything. I think there was like 3 stages of note in the entire tutorial. The first one was the boss thing that you have to kill. The second was a room filled with giant stone skulls, which is a recurring theme with this game. And finally, there was one level that had this giant automaton stomping around, and you had to use it as a platform, and the physics were having none of it, and they were the worst collectibles in the game. But other than that, you just have like, what, 17 levels of basically just the same platforming over and over? It really is just one giant pile of filler in a game that's actually genuinely quite interesting. The game itself is primarily just a wandering around looking at stuff and collecting things up, with some light third-person shooting elements and extreme skateboarding elements inserted because reasons. It does very much remind me of something like LSD Dream Emulator, kind of mixed a bit with Jet Force Gemini in the best of ways. Seriously though, aside from kind of how wonky the tutorial is, everything else about this game is a lot of fun. Now, because Automaton Lung is a game that effectively is minimalist storytelling without a single word spoken to you, it actually relies very, very heavily on a singular factor, and it puts a lot of the enjoyment in the game on the players themselves. For you see, the players will ultimately be generating the forward momentum of trying to push through the plot, because games like this rely very heavily on a singular factor: basic human curiosity. A game like this will require the players to be actively engaged and curious about what the world they're currently in, and what's out there to explore, and what any of this is. And whether the game actively answers those questions or not is kind of irrelevant. It's all about creating a world that will actively engage with the player's imagination, to make them interpret this in their own way. Automaton Lung accomplishes this expertly. The way it was structured, starting from a singular room to a big mysterious city, to this giant world, then slowly shrinking back to smaller, more intimate locations no matter where you went, I was always wondering what every single location was in this world, what role it had in this world's destruction, and what any of it actually meant. And every single one of these areas, especially in the smaller, more intimate areas, there always felt like there was more questions and more mysteries that were brought to my attention, which ultimately engaged me more and made me more interested in what this world was. To create a game that's so heavy on narrative without any spoken dialogue or information, and yet to engage the player entirely with the player's own imagination effectively, this game utilized what it had excellently. This game is surreal and it inspires the imagination of its players, and that is, in a sense, kind of the biggest mechanic of this game, and it does so very, very well. Exploring this mysterious world and going to these mysterious locations, such as the city trapped in a birdcage, the bridge in the middle of nowhere, pyramids, the cathedral, or the location I have dubbed the college campus, because it feels like an area from a Tony Hawk game, and yet it's completely untouched by whatever apocalyptic event happened here. There's also some other hidden areas, and what's really cool is each of these areas actually has interior areas to explore as well, that have other secret hidden things. The way they structured this game in terms of its locations was really quite clever. It's just fun to explore and see what it's about, and there's a lot of weird stuff in this game to just look at and try and figure out what this world is. If this game had one other advantage that helps once again tap into the human curiosity that's ultimately pushing everything in this game through, it is that it has an amazing atmosphere. This game absolutely nails a mysterious, desolate, and isolating sort of environment. It almost kind of has a Metroid-y feel because of it. You are effectively alone in this world, with everything else around you being vaguely defined shape monsters that are all actively hostile to you. There is nothing nice to you in this game. You are alone, and you have to figure out your place in it, and I kind of love that. The feeling of sheer isolation that is cultivated in this game just feels awesome. The overall presentation to Automaton Lung is solid. Visually, it looks pretty much like a N64 or PS1 game, and I think that helps the game out because it's going for a lower resolution design. You know, the visuals get a little bit muddier than if it was clearer, and that means that there's a lot more room to try and figure out and interpret what's going on. That definitely helps the mystique of this game, I think. Enemies are primarily low poly shapes more than anything, and they're not the most interesting, I'll say that much, but I think that everything in this game looks distinct and interesting, and it looks fantastic. The soundtrack to this game absolutely slaps. It's primarily just electronic music, and it reminds me a lot of something from Metroid, or one of my favorite movies of all time, Nausicaa. I love the soundtrack in this game, and what's really cool is, like how every environment has sort of an interior and exterior, each interior area has a different variation of the exterior's theme. I'm particularly a fan of the college campus interior theme, which is like this lo-fi, almost 8-bit version of the exterior theme, and it is just so good. Seriously, the soundtrack to this game is amazing, leading to an awesome presentation. Now, if you want a copy of Automaton Lung on Steam, it is currently selling for about $20, which I'm not gonna lie, is a bit steep. I think I bought this on sale for like $7. It does go on sale fairly frequently from what I found, and even at full price, I'd say it's worth it. It's not a long game, mind. Having to replay this game 4 times because I had recording issues, I ended up beating this game in like an hour and a half. But the first time I played this, it ended up taking me about 5 hours. Although that was a 100% clear thing, so of course it's gonna take a bit longer. The point is, it's not a super long game, but it's a meaningful experience, and it's an interesting experience in making what you want of it. I think everyone's gonna have a different interpretation as to what this game is and what it's about, and honestly, I like this game a lot. I would love to play a sequel to this or any other game that's kind of like this. If you know of a game like this, let me know, because I like these weird sort of wandering around looking at weird stuff ups. Seriously, the psychedelic and surreal tags are 2 of my favorite tags on all of Steam because I get to see so many interesting games I definitely want to play. But if you know of another game that's kind of like this or anything sort of like that, let me know, because I'm always looking for more weird looking games to look at just for personal interest, if nothing else. But Automaton Lung is definitely a fun game to play. Sure, the tutorial's a little bit like 60% of the game's size for some reason, and it's underwhelming in that regard. When you actually get out of that tutorial, you get met with a world full of mysteries that's ever expanding, ever changing, and it's really something special. Automaton Lung is not an easy to understand game, at least in regards to what it actually is about. I still have no idea what this game's ending is actually supposed to mean. Nor do I understand why you get an achievement that says you beat the game when there's a whole sequence and like boss after it. This game is a lot of mysteries and confusion, but you know what it also is? A well-made quality experience. A mysterious game that feels like layers and layers of mystery that you need to unwrap and interpret for yourself, and I dig that a lot.